Okay, we are at the top of the hour. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be, and welcome to our Help I'm an Accidental Government Information Librarian webinar series. I'm Aaron Wilson. I am the Serials and Government Information Cataloging Librarian with the University of Maryland, and I serve as one of the co-chairs of the GoDort Education Committee. We welcome you to our webinar for today. Before we begin, we want to take care and address a few housekeeping and logistical matters. We remind that all participants, we ask that they stay muted during today's presentation. And you are welcome to drop in questions for our participants in the Q&A section of the webinar portal. We will be monitoring those questions as they come in, and we will be answering those questions at points in time during our presentation. So to give our official welcome and opening, I will invite Julia Ezzo to give that. Julia serves as the Government Information, Packaging, and Political Science Librarian at Michigan State University and chair of GoDort. So Julia, take it away.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm pleased to officially open today's session on public trust, transparency, information, and democratic engagement. Our goal today is to highlight the importance of open government, access to information, and accountability as foundations of a healthy democracy. Before we dive in, I want to extend a huge thank you to our organizers, the GoDort Education Committee Sunshine Week Planning Subcommittee, support from the GoDort Education Committee, as well as the GoDort Help I'm an Accidental Government Information Librarian series, our ALA staff liaison Danielle Ponton, and the GoDort social media team for all their hard work on this. I'd like to introduce our event planning chairs, Anna and Patty, who have been instrumental in bringing this together. Anna Zhang is head of the Kelly Center for Government Information and Civic Engagement, Vondran Library at Rice University. Patty Takash is the political science librarian from the University of Florida. Anna, I'll pass the mic over to you, and I hope you all enjoy today's wonderful panel.
Thank you, Julia, for your introduction. And hi, everyone, again to this event today. I am Anna Xiong from Rice University. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our honored panelists today. The first panelist is Dr. Connie Citro. She is senior scholar in the Committee on National Statistics at the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, member of the American Statistical Association project to assess and monitor the health of federal statistics. She previously served as CNSTAT director and the senior study director. For CNSTAT, she has worked on studies of the 1990 to 2020 censuses, measurement of poverty and income, and the CNSTAT's flagship publication, Principles and Practices for a Federal Statistical Agency. Our second panelist is Patrick Flaherty. He is Director of Research at the Connecticut Department of Labor, Connecticut's labor market information shop, and the data integration hub for P20 WIN. Connecticut's state longitudinal data system on the P20 WIN data governing board and serves as the Connecticut Department of Labor's agency data officer. Adjunct faculty at the University of Connecticut, Labor Commissioner's designee on the Connecticut Retirement Security Program, and a New England representative on the Local Employment Dynamics Steering Committee. So he is an expert sitting at the intersection between federal and state data. Our third panelist today is Michelle Reardon-Node. She is the Executive Director of the CT Data Collaborative Executives Division and Strategy of the organization, which seeks to democratize access to public data and to facilitate data-driven decision-making. She holds a bachelor's degree in mathematics from Boston College and a master's in public policy from the University of Chicago. Please join us to welcome our three panelists. And next, we have two moderators today, Jessica and Jennifer. Jessica is a social science librarian for research engagement and government documents librarian from Marks Science and Social Science Library at Yale University. Jennifer is business information consultant in Lawinger Library at Georgetown University. Now I will let Jessica take over. Let's get started.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you, Connie and Patrick and Michelle, for being here today. I am going to be asking the first few questions, and these are going to be for all the panelists to answer. So the first one is as follows. Trust in government institutions has fluctuated significantly in recent decades. From your perspectives, whether through government information, statistical systems, or public communication, what do you see as the primary drivers of declining trust today?
May I go
Yes.
ahead?
Oh, sure. Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
thank you. Well, I want to thank Godard for inviting me to this very important session in this time of, yes, low trust in the government and many institutions. I thought it'd be useful just to give very quickly some basic overview. The Pew Research Center has followed this issue of trust in government. There's a question, do you trust Washington to do the right thing almost always or most of the time? And that was actually at almost 80% in the early 60s. It fell just monotonically to 30% in 1980. It's been up and down a few times since then, but never more than about 55%, which was achieved in 1991, the Gulf War, and in 2001 with 9/11. But since 2011, where that measure was 15%, it's been in a very tight range of people not trusting the government to do the right thing. And it's currently at about 17, only 17% of the public does have this trust. And again, there are a whole variety of factors in this period since 2011. And I think some of them have to do with from President Obama through Trump 2, I will call it, the second administration, the public's been whipsawed. Big changes in political control, including off-year elections that change congressional control and lead to standoffs and inability of administration to carry through on their program. And voters are confused and frustrated. And then we've all read about the polarization among political elites and the public, wars, COVID, which really did a number on us as a society, and missteps in handling of guidance and information have left mistrust. People want to do their own research rather than looking to expertise. And then economic hardship and inequality have left many people stretched and upset that the government doesn't seem to be able to help. And then there's some media out there that sort of actively foment distrust. So there's a lot going on. And even federal statistics, which are so necessary for us and should be above the fray, trust in their credibility and willingness to participate in surveys have been affected by a number of factors, which I can talk a little bit more about, but I don't want to monopolize. Let some other folks talk. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add on to Connie's comments, in particular, thinking about the statistical system and what we've seen is with the first Trump administration threatening the citizenship question on Census 2020. I mean, that has led to an erosion of trust in government data, all government data that's collected. So, and we see it continue today through, as we are leading up to the planning of Census 2030. We have huge trust issues. Again, the citizenship question is coming back, in addition to other mechanisms that have taken place over this past year, such as sharing of data between agencies without proper governance, and all the actions, I would say, of DOGE have led to severe decline in trust in collection of government data, of the public's data, sorry.
Yes, I totally agree on that. And then there are some genuine problems that are affecting quality of some federal statistics, declining response rates being a huge A huge one. And worryingly, response, people just don't like to answer surveys of any kind. But for some key government surveys, such as the American Community Survey, which is very widely used, and it's a mandatory survey, supposedly, refusals have gone up. It's just not that people aren't at home or they don't, pick up the phone or whatever. Active refusals have increased, and that's very worrisome.
Yeah, Patrick, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Sure. Obviously we do a lot of surveys here, and certainly we've seen the response rates fall. And part of it is a lack of trust in general, not just in government. And some of that, unfortunately, lack of trust is correct. There are so many scammers out there, so many identity thieves out there. So when we send out a survey or we make a call, we get so many calls from potential respondents just asking us, is this for real?
Right.
Because the fraudsters have gotten so good at faking that they are us. And so some of the lack of trust in us as government, and I am in government, is really just a lack of trust in general, and they don't even believe we are who we say we are. And fortunately, we're able to sometimes convince people that yes, we really are the Labor Department, and yes, we really need your data, and yes, they are then willing to cooperate. But the idea that they might be being a victim of identity theft is not a crazy idea. I mean, myself, I almost got scammed by somebody who was claimed to be uh, my internet service provider in my home, and they seem to be from the company I am a customer of. They seem to be asking me to do things that were correct, and then halfway through the call, I realized this is not really for real. Unfortunately, I was not a victim, but I was on a list. They wanted to make me a victim. And that experience would make somebody less willing to respond to a government survey.
I think that's a great point. And thank you all for bringing up, yeah, that responding to surveys and actually providing information is a big part of this, and it involves a lot of trust. So following up on that, and about talking about federal statistical agencies, these agencies play a central role in producing trusted public data, from census counts to economic indicators. What institutional practices help ensure that official statistics remain credible and insulated from political pressure?
Well, again, if I might start, the government statistics really are key infrastructure for the country, for our society, our economy, planning, state, local, federal government, media, just citizens. And they need to be objective and credible and trustworthy. So they need to be insulated. And I think that can be harder to do in our system, perhaps, which is highly decentralized compared to most other countries. There's no Statistics USA. There are 13 principal statistical agencies like the Census Bureau, 100 other biggish statistical programs around the government, and a chief statistician in the Office of Management and Budget. And the chief statistician's position was authorized back in 1986, and there's an interagency council on statistical policy that was authorized in legislation in 1995. And over the course of the last 40 years, the chief stats office has issued a whole bunch of statistical policy directives and standards that cover things like how you release things like the unemployment rate so that nobody gets an early peak, that kind of thing, and standards for how are race, ethnicity measured, or industry, or so on. Also in 2002, some very strong legislation was passed to secure the confidentiality of federal statistics. There are stiff penalties on anyone in a federal statistical agency under this act who lets individual data be identified. And it also applies to people who do like surveys for them or researchers who are sworn in. And then there is the bipartisan Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act of 2018, which is about strengthening the ability of the federal government to make policy based on actually evidence. And it has a whole title about federal statistical agencies and how their parent agencies, like the Census Bureaus and the Department of Commerce, are obligated to protect and support them and keep them able to be objective and credible. There are also things like my unit at the National Academy of Sciences, the Committee on National Statistics, issues something called Principles and Practices for a Federal Statistical Agency, and we update it every 4 years, so a new administration or a second term, it's available. And all of this is to protect the professional independence of the agencies. The problem we face right now is that this administration is barely constrained by legislation. It is not constrained by norms or directives or academy publications. In the future, if we get a chance, we might want to have some kind of national statistics law. Doesn't necessarily have meaning consolidate the agencies, but just to place them each on a stronger legislative footing so that they are better positioned to uphold. Again, they need professional independence to use the best methods and the best data and not having anybody say, well, we'd really like you to, how about delaying this report till after the election? Or how about, slightly, downplaying this statistic or something? That is what we do not want. So there are institutional structures, but they are not as strong as they need to be.
Wonderful. Michelle or Patrick, did you want to add to that?
Well, I would also say that, there's been some degradation in data quality due to lack of resources. So,
Yes.
we're
Yes.
partners with the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We in state government also have seen, a decrease. My staff is much smaller than the staff that was in existence here when I started working in this agency, 16 years ago. Um, and the degradation in quality just because of the lack of resources sometimes gets conflated with political interference, and we've seen that recently with the big revisions.
Yeah.
And but I would also argue that in some ways has held. I mean, the firing of Erica McIntosh, the wonderful Erica McIntosh, she really is a fantastic
Yeah.
person. Um, uh, didn't lead to uh, any sort of political change in the way BLS is run. The person who's now uh, the acting commissioner is a longtime BLS employee, has served under multiple administrations of both parties, and is very objective. And the first nominee of the new administration, who might have been a more political commissioner, he was withdrawn because it was clear that he wasn't going to be confirmed. And so, at least for now, the institutional framework has held. And then I would say, in terms of just very specifically to get into the weeds, here in labor statistics, our main statistics come out of the unemployment insurance system, which is, while it's federally it's managed under federal rules, it's all state people. And so the data we get from our tax system, and this is true throughout the nation, would be very hard to manipulate that. You would have to manipulate hundreds and hundreds of people throughout the country and who are state employees, who are collecting data to help administer the unemployment insurance system. And so we have some safeguards in a decentralized system that you might not have if things were more centralized.
Maybe just to add on a little bit, Jessica, I think you asked about, institutional practices, and what comes to my mind are strong data governance. So I think that's a key piece of ensuring statistics remain credible. To Patrick's point, stable multi-year funding also ensures that. Having independent oversight bodies is also critical, so that you have, people monitoring what's happening, also adding their expertise into the statistics and the methodologies. although, Patrick, we haven't seen, bad things happen or things have stayed stable, right? As with the appointment of the commissioner based on political loyalty, not necessarily merits, that also does send a signal to the system of, that's different than has been before. So I think that also gets back to the trust. When you have that kind of appointment, you don't, it does degrade trust a bit in the system. And so I would also add just, consistency and transparency around methodologies about privacy and confidentiality guidelines are important, all good practices, right, to make sure that the statistical system remains credible and reliable.
Yeah, Michelle, yeah, I don't want to be too naive here. When the President of the United States accuses the BLS commissioner of manipulating the data, that is bad.
Yeah.
And that erodes trust.
Yeah.
And he did that, and it was not good for the system, and it was not good for the country, and it was not accurate.
Right.
Right.
But there was an outpouring of press attention. He picked the wrong agency, essentially, the wrong set of statistics. There was outpouring internationally in the business press. The Wall Street Journal kept on this story for a long time, and it did stiffen the spines in Congress to tell the president that his first nominee was not qualified. The person who is the nominee right now is a credible, very experienced person. But your point, Patrick, about budgets. Yes, since the Great Recession, essentially, statistical agency budgets at the federal level have been going down in inflation adjusted terms. And that has just sort of accelerated recently. But even more troubling is all the effort, which wasn't necessarily aimed at statistical agencies directly, but has had really made things really tough for them, is all the staff losses because of not hiring people who were still in their probationary period, giving people these buyout offers, outright rifts. And there are agencies, you spoke, Michelle, about the 2030 census. The current deputy director of the Census Bureau, Ron Jarman, who steered the 2020 census through a very difficult time with COVID, is retiring in May. And there is really a lack of just people at all levels, but including at the top of many of the agencies to handle the load that they have. And that's very troubling.
Thank you all for, oh, sorry.
Sure. I was just going to say, I did put in the chat one to the Pew data on the trust trends over time, and one to the American Statistical Association project on assessing the health of the federal statistics. There's a lot of material there. We've done reports. We do monitoring of what's happening, both good and bad. There have been some recent hiring opportunities, for instance, at Census and I think BLS, which is great. There's a lot of resources there for folks who work with government data. So just wanted to call that to your attention. Thank you.
And I'll just add an example to Connie's mentioning the staff firings. There with the federal poverty level. The survey went out in the field, but when the data came back, the entire department had been fired, riffed, so there was no one left there to calculate the federal poverty level. So that's just an example of, and they have contingency plans, but they don't have contingency plans for if the entire department is gone.
Right.
So that's just an example of what Connie's referencing.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I'm so glad that we have different federal and state perspectives here, because it is a really complicated picture of what is going on, and the efforts to kind of protect the independence of these agencies. So I really appreciate everyone's takes on this and the resources. I know I have already benefited from the American Statistical Association reports to keep up to date on what is happening and what the main concerns are. And in that vein, the next question is actually on more to do with people using government data. So what should librarians and others who utilize state and federal data look for when they're evaluating whether to utilize a federal or state data source?
That's a great question. It's a tough question for every data user. Many users don't have time to become expert in various kinds of data. But I think a couple of the questions you ask yourself about, first of all, can you find documentation for the data source that explains how the data are collected, whether it's from administrative records or surveys or scraping the web or whatever? And if you can't find anything I would be question that. In the federal statistical agencies, of course, they do provide documentation. It's not always the Census Bureau, which I love, but they do so much that it's sometimes hard to find what you're looking for a specific data set, but it is there. I think the first question is really one of relevance. A data set can be accurate, but if it's not answering the question that you have, or if it's answering a question that's different from what you think it's answering. So a good example of that are the unemployment rates. There are actually half a dozen unemployment measures that BLS reports, maybe even more than that. The flagship one has to do with what people were doing last week and whether they worked even just a little bit or were searching for a job. But there are other measures that take into account underemployment and long-term unemployment and just what among the adult working age population who is working. And those may be a more relevance. I just saw a piece today about what's becoming important in labor circles is not just like minimum wage, but hours, because many companies for low-income workers don't give people, they have this just-in-time scheduling, and you can't work enough hours at any wage to put together an income. So relevance really is important. And then, of course, given that you have something that's relevant or useful for you, accuracy, reliability, margins of error, biases, and that's why falling response rates are a real problem. They increase they make the estimates less reliable in statistical terms, and they also may introduce biases. Now, the statistical agencies don't put out estimates that they think are, not good enough. But what they may do is say, well, we can give you a national number, but we can no longer give you the geographic numbers that you want because we have this problem of falling response rates, or perhaps not enough budget just to collect the kind of sample size that we used to collect. So first, make sure the data are actually answering the question you have, and then look for accuracy and reliability. And as your role as librarians, if the documentation's not clear or doesn't seem adequate, fire off a note, to let agencies know, because they do want to serve the public, but sometimes they don't. They are not themselves a data user from the outside, and so they may not have explained things as clearly as they could, that sort of thing.
Michelle or Patrick, is there anything you want to add to that? I do have a brief follow-up question, but I want to see if there's anything you want to add to that.
Well, I would just agree with Connie and to say that, the data often does not speak for itself. I mean, it really needs context. And, there's, you can lose credibility in a lot of different ways. And to me, there's a big difference between, a president accusing political manipulation and say the Fed chair criticizing the BLS's birth death model. Well, that's a legitimate discussion. And the birth death model problem really comes back to the resources again, where I think they would love to modernize it and just don't have the ability to do that. Um, and they kind of have to defend their output, even though they kind of know there's some problems with the birth death model. And this is when businesses are born and die. The other thing is to also understand that there's a big difference between administrative data and self-report. And, one of the realities of the past decades or so is the number of people who self-identify as biracial has increased dramatically. Doesn't necessarily mean that the population has changed that much. It's just that people are self-identifying. I mean, I get asked all the time, how do you decide who's Hispanic? And I answer, I don't. Anyone who calls himself Hispanic on our survey, we say they are Hispanic, and we aren't in the business of DNA testing or anything else. We're not ancestry.com. If we deal with self-identified data, and I self-identify as a white man, that's what I'm counted as.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. There is a new race and ethnicity standard from the Office of Management and Budget, uh, and the revised standard that was last revised in 1997. And it's going to be used in the American Community Survey, I think, in another year, and then in the census. But administrative records like birth and death records, which the Census Bureau uses to update population in between censuses, they won't change to this new setup overnight. So there's going to be a lot of issues there. The Census Bureau is planning to help users by doing what they call crosswalks. But it is, yes, it is that's a particular area where how people are identified by race and ethnicity varies a lot depending on a whole bunch of factors, such as are they being asked, are their parents being asked, or somebody in a hospital, say, being asked, et cetera.
Thank you. So my quick follow-up question to that, and this is more kind of at the state level, but what kinds of state data do you feel are most overlooked but that may be useful as institutions seek reliable data?
I'm interested in the answer to this one myself, hopefully from Patrick. So,
well, I mean, we produce a lot of statistics, and I would just say that, from whether it's someone in a local economic development board to the governor's office, they don't look at them, they don't read them. They call me up because, and they'll even ask me for things that are, I've received, it's a hilarious non sequitur, but I've received Freedom of Information Act requests for things that are on our website. So, like, you don't need to do an FOI request. Just ask us. We'll tell you the answer. Um, so, I think this is where the librarians could really help. I mean, there is so much data that is being produced. I do believe that at least from the state level, our state statistical agencies, and goes red states, blue states, our state statistical agencies are producing very good data. I do think we're working hard, and this is one of the questions that's coming. We are working hard to make it more accessible. Um, Perhaps some of it's a little obscure. Some of our website itself is very dense, and maybe it's hard to find the right thing. Um, uh, so I think there's a lot that's overlooked. And All I can say is we're trying, trying to get it out there. Um,
I just would just add that at the state level, I think one of the advantages that you have in terms of state data is administrative data. So we're, talking about federal statistical data, which would be different than the administrative data, but thinking about Medicaid data, a portion of that does go to the federal government in a standardized format, so that it can be compared across the 50 states. But Medicaid offices, within states have rich information that goes beyond what's available at the federal level. So that's just one example. I mean, if you can think of a myriad of programs that are administered by states that would have, this administrative data that can be, depending on the type of data you're looking for, can be tapped into for um, research purposes, program administration purposes, so I think that's a piece that as we start to see and the degradation of the federal statistical and this administration trying to, I don't know how to say this in nice terms, but, destroy the federal statistical system. I think it's going to require many in the states to figure out like what do we have, what are the assets that we have, and start funding them and start building them up and using them too.
And working collaboratively across states
Yeah.
and with relevant academics and so on. And there are a number of state consortia in various subject matters I know that are doing great things.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I definitely think there is a tendency, at least that I've experienced, of people to kind of, or researchers to jump to FOIA when that's not really the fastest or most effective way to get information. And there is really a wealth of information, particularly at the state level, that a lot of people miss out on. All right, so I'm going to hand over the next set of questions to Jennifer. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. And this is going so well. And it is just so good to hear that I'm not going crazy, that the response rate is going lower and the statistical, and it's like, what could we be doing? So we've been talking about what the federal government has been doing and the state governments are doing. Let's now talk a little bit more about what the users. And so we've been talking about users, but many citizens interact with the government primarily through data dashboards, their statistics and reports. How can statistical agencies and public institutions communicate complex data in ways that both are transparent and understandable to the public?
That's the big challenge. In fact, I see something in the chat about redesign of federal websites being not helpful, and not quite sure which agency the commenter is referring to, but I certainly know examples. That is a challenge, and I think that public institutions, agencies, groups of users, libraries, I think could be absolutely critical. I would love to see projects that focus on students and the general public's education about how to read statistics, say in the news media. For example, when economic indicators come out, it is essential that for trends that things be put in inflation adjusted amounts, because otherwise it is misleading, when particularly if inflation is a bit on the high side. That doesn't always happen. I think I sort of imagine walking into a public library or a museum where, among other things, they have one of these, computer-enabled thing was, what would you like to know about your neighborhood? And you give topics like unemployment or crime or something, and it would then take you through. Okay, here's some data. Here's how when I was talking about relevance, which unemployment rate might be the most meaningful, et cetera. And it would also explain things like inflation adjusted real dollars versus nominal dollars and things like that. There are some programs. The Census Bureau has the Statistics in Schools program that has some very helpful materials. The New York Federal Reserve Bank, of all things,
Yes.
has a comic book series explaining the history of money and of inflation and all the terms that are used, and it is really quite good. Now, somebody has to have some funding for some of these ideas, and I do think it would be wonderful if a group like Godort, the Association of Public Data Users, all kinds of groups like that, were to get somebody to fund a real kick the tires for Federal Statistical Agency websites. And how could they be made more user friendly for users of varying levels of expertise? Because there's a huge amount of variation in how useful they are across, from the Bureau of Justice Statistics to the Census Bureau to the National Center for Health Statistics, et cetera. I would love to see something like that. Meanwhile, I think statistical agencies need to be encouraged to be as clear as they can, to have things like glossaries and cross references. So you want to learn more about, why we use this inflation indicator or how we do the population, update the population estimates, go here, that kind of thing. But it is a real challenge to figure out priorities for what would be most helpful in this regard. But again, I have this vision of that there would be, in my world, there would be a lot of user driven. Okay, fix your website this way and you'll find usage exploding because people will be more able to understand where to go and how to get the data. And that, by the way, should help you with Congress. The more users you have, the more the support hopefully you can build.
And I guess I would push back a little on when I think of the government's role, I think of it, they're primarily responsible for making public data available. And
Yes.
so I would never want to see resources diverted from um, making public data available to making it more accessible. Because I think, that is the role of government is to make it available. And I could be a little biased because my organization in Connecticut, Connecticut Data Collaborative, we are an intermediary. We consider ourselves the data intermediaries. So our role and part of our mission is to make data accessible. So we focus on taking the government data that's made available and through visualization tools and, different ways, trying to make that data accessible to a broad audience. So, and we work on increasing data capacity skills, data literacy skills. So, and I see librarians as a key piece of that. Like librarians are data intermediaries, and your role is to be the translator, to be the facilitator of here's the data that's available, and now let me help you put it into context. Let me help you find the metadata. Let me teach you how to use it. And so, if data is not made available by the government, we don't have that accessibility. So I go back to just I think we need to the primary role of government should be making public data is a public good. So keep focusing on the public good.
I totally agree with that. I mean, if the data are not available, then if it's only, or put it this way, if it's only available to say researchers who have money and time to go through the very arduous process to work with, which is now possible to work like with confidential data. If agencies were to pull more of their data into that kind of environment, that would. On the other hand, there are things like, I don't know how many of you use or try to use data.census.gov.
Yeah. Yes, agreed.
It
I
is
know what you're going
not,
to say.
it is not great.
Yeah.
And it's never been great since it was Fact Finder and so on. And I think part of that is the Census Bureau doesn't have the resources and they don't really kick the tires enough with users. But many users will go, they want something, somebody needs a number for the mayor, in the next 20 minutes or 10 minutes.
Mhm.
And so I think you need both. I think the intermediaries are very important, but I also think that agencies with some structured feedback could improve uh, their own things like websites and so on.
Patrick, do you
Great.
have any comment?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I'm on both sides here. I got the comment about I don't like the redesign. We're going through a modernization of our website now. One uh, criteria, though, is that we are doing everything we can to make sure that in the near future our website will be compliant with the ADA requirements. And the person who's in charge of that whole project for state government as a whole, not just with regard to data, but everything about state government websites, uh, really has a very strong philosophy that it is about accessibility for all citizens. And it's not just focused on folks that might have a visual impairment, although that's obviously an important population, but for everybody. So, they've been pushing us to try to make our language more accessible in terms of lowering the grade level. And sometimes it gets tough because we had a lot of jargon, in economic
Mhm.
land here.
Yeah.
Uh, but we're we're at least hearing that, and we're going to try to respond. There's a certain limit that we can't, if we have to accurately describe how the unemployment rate is calculated. And so if we don't it's hard to do that without getting into some jargon.
Yep.
It's a balance, but it is something that at least we're working on, and I know other states are as well, to try to uh, make our situation more accessible, knowing that we'll probably always need the media intermediaries, Michelle. Don't worry. We're not going to put you out of business. Uh, but we are going to try to make it easier for some of our users. And I still think that in the end, people are going to still go to their librarian, go to Michelle, call me up and just say, what's the unemployment rate in Waterbury, when they could easily find it on our website, but somehow have difficulty with that. Um, and then one thing we don't know about the future is, to totally go off topic for a second here, is the whole, what is AI going to mean? Because
Right.
AI will make it so much easier for some people to be able to scrape our website, get all the data, format it any way they want. And then this may be a new digital divide where some users are just able to customize everything and get it all, and others, are who don't have that skill or access to those tools will be uh, needing maybe even more hand holding. We'll see.
I think that would be a great question for towards the end because I think everybody here has an opinion about how AI will save us or condemn us. But let me get to another question, which is kind of related. Institutions like libraries, universities, journalists, and society organizations often act as that intermediary between the government data and the public. What role should we, the institutions, play in strengthening public understanding and trust in official information?
Well, I think, it does take some time to learn what's going on. So, like when we have a big revision in our data, for example, some people would want to like have some conspiracy theory around that. And then,
Mhm.
the true story is response rates are falling. With falling response rate, there's a higher standard of error. That's just a statistical property.
Right.
Um, and then when we get the administrative data where we can benchmark it to, suddenly we discover that we were within that very large, unfortunately, margin of error,
Right.
but that the estimate was off, and that the administrative data is less timely. I mean, that's the thing. There's always this trade-off, and that the big revision isn't necessarily a sign of some big conspiracy. It's a sign of the fact that we actually are trying to do it right. Like, similar to, when the newspaper that publishes a lot of corrections, that's actually a sign that they're responsible journalists. That's not a sign of problems.
Yes.
Hmm.
And
Yes.
the news organization that never some news organizations brag about the fact that they've never published a correction. Well, that tells me they're terrible. You know, uh, we make our best estimates, and then when we get better data and more information, we revise. And that's actually something that should increase trust, not decrease trust. And
Hmm.
unfortunately for the public, it's often the opposite. So the intermediaries can be part of that education process. That a big revision is actually a sign that they're really trying to get it right. It's not a sign that they don't know what they're doing.
That's just such an excellent point. And a fact is that most people are not comfortable with uncertainty and with
Mm.
changes. And that's, of course, what happened in spades in the COVID epidemic. I mean, it was called originally the novel coronavirus. That was
Mhm.
nobody knew its properties at the beginning. So there was a lot of back and forth, and understandably, people were frustrated by that. But as Patrick was saying, revisions of economic statistics are necessary, given that the markets want things fast, and the trade-off is that again there will be revisions. There are a couple of smaller things that I think could help, which is libraries and other groups could push for clear and adequate citations to source data.
Yeah.
Because you'll see in the paper, oh, just well, or it might say Census Bureau, but it would be very helpful if it would say American Community Survey or
Right.
whatever it was. And the Census Bureau has actually recently put forth some citation guidelines for their stuff. And I don't know whether you all have looked at those or think they're on the right track, but that's something where I think educating everybody who cites government's data for how to do that. On the other end, I'd love to see, you often see now on government websites, this is a official government agency website, something like that, right? And it takes you to a little something. I'd love to see with our decentralized system, this is a principal federal statistical agency. And then that would take you to a bunch of things about how we protect confidentiality and how we're objective and role of revisions and so on. Um, in other words, some branding that gets all of the major statistical agencies with a brand. And I'd also like to see that on there when they send out like advanced letters for surveys. Often it comes from the survey organization, and who's their contractor, and they're very good
Yeah.
organizations. But it really ought to come from the agency, and it ought to be we're an official fiscal agency. We're collecting data for the public good. People do respond. The research has shown if you can say these data are going to help your community or they're going to help make better policy in a bunch of areas, people do respond to that. So some of these things and groups such as, again, Association of Public Data Users, GODORT could be encouraging agencies to not hide their light under a bushel in that way, but to try to get a brand identity more than they have now. People know the Census Bureau. They don't necessarily know any other agency, but there are a lot of important ones, fiscal agencies.
Michelle, what else could we as users be doing to support the efforts?
Um, I mean, I think librarians are trusted individuals in the community. So I think just, librarians in general have facilitate that trust in statistical data because you are a trusted source of information, right? That's where you go to find out um, information and understanding sources and primary sources for secondary sources. So I think um, yeah, I think librarians and libraries are great places for building trust in communities. Um, I think universities are also critical because they help contextualize a lot of this data. and can provide independent verification and accountability through their research. So those are just, two thoughts that weren't already mentioned by Patrick or Connie.
And we were all, just let me add, we were all hopefully as our registered voters. And when we talk to our officials, when we run into somebody on the plane or if we had a town hall, ask about statistical relevancy and what they're going to be doing to promote trust in the government. Now we have we do have a question from the chat. And so let's see what we got. Aaron, you want to voice that question?
Certainly. When talking about the reduction of survey responses, are there ways for people to seek out the survey themselves, or does someone from the agency have to reach out to each individual? For instance, if someone was aware that the survey was live, could they go to a website or call a number to receive access to the survey?
That's an interesting question. In general, you want surveys to be representative. You want them to be probability surveys. So that means that uh, people are selected from various ways to be in a survey, and the survey organization, say, the Bureau of Labor Statistics or somebody, wants responses from that population. So that means that they would not want to have this sort of opportunity. But for the census, where everyone is supposed to be counted, they have tried over the decades to, and they did a lot in 2020, to have a procedure where if you didn't get your letter that had your ID code to enter in on the internet, or you misplaced it, you could just, there was a lot of advertising. It was called non-ID. It meant that you might whip out your cell phone and answer the questions, and they would include, your name and address and so on. So Census Bureau could verify whether you'd been counted already by somebody else in your household. But that's the one thing where they have always been seeking ways to let people know that they can and should get in contact with a phone number or a website. But otherwise, for a probability survey, the idea is you've picked a sample, and that's what those folks are the ones you're going with.
And I think, Connie, to your point earlier about having Census Bureau agencies state that this survey is coming from the Census Bureau or have some
Yes.
kind of citation is important, because when the household poll survey was going on, I had many people ask me, "Is this text message legitimate?"
Yes.
So it goes back to what we talked about earlier in the session of, Patrick, you mentioned scammers. They're trying to distribute surveys through different modes and mediums, but when you get a text message and you don't know, is this a legitimate? Am I going to be taken, to a nefarious link? It's a
Yes.
problem. Yeah.
I agree. I have personally gotten, I try to answer every legitimate
Right.
survey given what field I'm in. But I've gotten things that are, again, from the survey organization that doesn't really make it clear enough that they're doing this on behalf of a trustworthy, Federal Statistical Agency. And that is just not, make a lot of sense.
We don't have much time
Right.
today to talk about some of the other questions we have for you. And this is very fascinating, and I'm thrilled to have so many people here. You will be getting a survey about this event, and we will be asking what topic. And Godor Education Committee would be happy if we see an outpouring of a question to do something else to put something together. But at this point, I think we have to go to start wrapping it up.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Jessica, for your moderation of this wonderful discussion. To Patrick, to Michelle, to Connie, thank you so much for the wealth of information that you have shared with us in today's webinar. Again, to Anna and to Patty, thank you for facilitating the work of this this group for this second Sunshine Week webinar that we've done as an education committee, and of course to our friends with Godor, both Julia and to Danielle, and to all those attending. Thank you so much for just facilitating this. This has just been a great discussion. I'm looking forward to more of these going forward. These webinars, particularly for Sunshine Week, have just been a delight to see just the turnout and the appreciation of information that we are learning, of how to engage from a library perspective, but also from our partners in other aspects of this work and making sure information is promoted. So thank you everyone for joining us. Until next time, thank you for being with us here for our Go to our webinar series. And we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Have a good one.
Thank you. Try to.